A poor single mom falls asleep on a billionaire's shoulder, Episode 1. The fluorescent lights in the hospital waiting room buzzed softly overhead, casting a pale glow across the worn vinyl chairs. Sarah Martinez clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white against the faded leather. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., but time seemed to move differently in this place where worry hung thick in the air. Her daughter Emma, only 7 years old, lay behind the emergency room doors with a fever that had spiked dangerously high just hours before. Sarah had rushed her there in their old Honda, praying the engine wouldn't give out on the way. Now, all she could do was wait. The waiting room was nearly empty except for an elderly man reading a newspaper and a woman knitting in the corner. Sarah chose a seat near the back, away from the harsh overhead lights. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen, calculating numbers she'd already calculated a dozen times that evening. The emergency room visit would cost at least $800. The antibiotics, if Emma needed them, would be another $100. Sarah worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves during the day, but it barely covered rent and groceries. Health insurance was a luxury she simply couldn't afford. She rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar ache of exhaustion settling behind her eyes. Sarah hadn't slept properly in weeks, not since Emma had started getting sick. Every night, she'd check on her daughter, feeling her forehead, listening to her breathing, wondering if she was doing enough as a mother. A few seats away, a man in an expensive suit sat quietly, his phone dark in his hands. He wasn't talking to anyone or making calls like most people did when they were anxious. Instead, he simply sat there, his presence calm and steady in the chaos of the hospital. This was Alexander Hayes, though Sarah didn't know it. She didn't recognize him from the business magazines or news articles. To her, he was just another person waiting for news about someone they loved. Alexander had been visiting his grandmother when he'd heard about a young girl in the emergency room whose mother couldn't afford the treatment. He'd quietly spoken to the billing department and taken care of the expenses, as he often did. It was something he'd started doing years ago, after his own daughter had spent countless nights in hospitals during her battle with leukemia. Now he found himself staying, not quite ready to leave the place that held so many memories. Sarah's eyes grew heavy as the night wore on. She tried to stay alert, tried to be ready when the doctor came with news about Emma, but her body betrayed her. The combination of work, worry, and sleepless nights finally caught up with her. Her head began to nod forward, then jerk back up as she fought against sleep. The third time it happened, her body simply gave in. Her head tilted to the side and came to rest against something warm and solid. She had fallen asleep on the shoulder of the quiet man in the expensive suit. Alexander felt the gentle weight against his shoulder and glanced down. The woman beside him had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd noticed her earlier. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes, though clean, showed the wear of someone who worked hard for everything she had. He recognized the look immediately. It was the same expression his ex-wife had worn during their daughter's illness, the bone-deep tiredness that came from loving someone so much that you forgot to take care of yourself. Alexander remained perfectly still. He could have gently woken her, could have moved to another seat, but something about her vulnerability touched him. She reminded him of all the other parents he'd seen in hospital waiting rooms over the years, carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. Minutes passed quietly. The elderly man with the newspaper left. The woman in the corner finished her knitting and packed up her supplies. Still, Alexander didn't move. Sarah's breathing deepened into the rhythm of genuine rest. For the first time in weeks, her face relaxed completely. Her phone, which had been clutched tightly in her hand, loosened in her grip. "Mrs. Martinez," a gentle voice called out. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her features for a moment as she realized where she was. She jerked upright, heat flooding her cheeks as she turned to the man whose shoulder she'd been using as a pillow. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, mortified. "I didn't mean to." "It's perfectly fine," Alexander said softly, his voice kind. "You needed the rest." Dr. Peterson approached with a warm smile. "Mrs. Martinez, I have good news about Emma. Her fever has broken, and she's responding well to the treatment. She's asking for you." Relief flooded through Sarah like a wave. She stood quickly, gathering her purse with shaking hands. Thank you, doctor. Can I see her now? Of course. And Mrs. Martinez. Dr. Peterson paused. The billing department wanted me to let you know that your account has been taken care of. An anonymous benefactor covered all of Emma's expenses tonight. Sarah's mouth fell open. I don't understand. How is that possible? Sometimes, drive. Peterson said with a knowing glance toward Alexander. Angels come in unexpected forms. Sarah looked back at the quiet man who had let her sleep against his shoulder without complaint. He was studying his hands, deliberately not meeting her eyes, but she saw the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Alexander finally looked up, and Sarah was struck by the kindness in his eyes. Sometimes we all need someone to lean on, he said simply. I'm glad your daughter is going to be okay. As Sarah walked toward the emergency room doors to reunite with Emma, she felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't just relief about Emma's recovery or gratitude for the unexpected financial help. It was something deeper, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world, that strangers could show compassion without expecting anything in return. Behind her, Alexander remained in his seat for a few more minutes, remembering his own daughter's laughter and thinking about the sleeping woman who had trusted him completely without even knowing his name. Sometimes, he reflected, the most meaningful connections happened in the quietest moments, when people let their guards down and simply allowed themselves to be human together. The hospital waiting room returned to its usual hum of activity, but something had changed in that small corner where two strangers had shared an unexpected moment of grace.